They did not ask, they declared. My mother's fork clicked against her plate as she set it down too neatly, her lips curving into that brittle smile I had known all my life. The smile that said a decision had been made long before I ever sat down at the table. My father cleared his throat like he was preparing to deliver a boardroom verdict. My younger brother Brian leaned back in his chair, arms folded already, wearing the smug expression of someone who had been handed a prize. And then the words dropped across the casserole and iced tea and Sunday politeness like a stone through glass. Brian will be moving into your apartment. My pulse stuttered. My fork hovered over my plate and then slid soundlessly onto the tablecloth. The apartment. The one place in the world I had built with my own sweat, my numbers, my spreadsheets, my careful savings from nights spent poring over ledgers while my friends bought drinks and vacations I could not afford. My mother's tone was syrupy, almost proud. "It is the right thing, Melissa. He is starting his married life. He needs a proper home. And you are just a girl. You will marry one day, your husband will provide. You do not need property weighing you down." My father nodded once firm, final. "It is settled." The room tilted, the clatter of dishes muffled, and for a moment I thought I might laugh because it was so absurd, so perfectly in character, so inevitable that of course they would strip me of the only thing they had never touched. Brian smirked across the table, his voice dripping casual cruelty. "You should be proud, sis. At least your apartment will finally serve the family." My chest tightened, fury surged, but I swallowed it back, pressing it down into the quiet cage I had built for years. They waited for me to protest, to raise my voice so they could call me selfish, cold, ungrateful. They wanted the fight, the theater of my resistance. Instead, I smiled faintly, my voice even calm, practiced. "If it helps Brian, why not?" The silence was sharp, startled. My mother blinked, my father exhaled. Brian chuckled like he had already won. None of them noticed how still I went, how the air around me seemed to harden. None of them asked why I agreed so easily. None of them realized that beneath my calm compliance, something else was turning something they had never accounted for, because in that moment I was no longer shocked by their audacity. I was no longer even angry at their blindness. I was something quieter, sharper, more dangerous. I was done. My name is Melissa Carter, and I am 29 years old. I work as a senior accountant in a mid-sized firm in the city, the kind of place no one brags about, but everyone relies on when numbers go wrong. I live, or at least I lived until recently, in a quiet building with beige walls and creaky elevators, a place that was never glamorous, but was mine, carved out dollar by dollar, month by month. I built everything I had without shortcuts, no trust funds, no family handouts, no secret inheritance waiting to catch me if I stumbled. My degree, my job, my savings, even the scratched second-hand table in my kitchen, all of it came from me. But if you asked my parents, Edward and Linda Carter, they would not describe me as strong or diligent. They would call me cold. Not because I ever shouted or slammed doors or disowned them, but because I learned to stop cleaning up the messes they and my brother Brian left behind. In our house, Brian was the chosen one from the beginning. From the moment he was born, the youngest, the son, the heir, my parents decided the sun rose and set on him. When I was 10, I remember wanting to join a summer riding camp. Linda told me it was too expensive, but 2 weeks later, Brian had a brand new bicycle with racing stripes. When I was 16 and asked if I could borrow the car to drive to a college tour, Edward said it was too risky, too expensive for gas, but that same month, Brian's driver lessons were fully funded with extra cash slipped to the instructor for patience. The pattern never stopped. They told me girls do not need college the way boys do, that I would marry someday and depend on a man, but I refused. I worked part-time jobs, scholarships, anything to scrape together tuition. I graduated top of my class, and they did not attend the ceremony. They were at Brian's soccer game, a regional match that he lost, but they still cheered louder for his defeat than they ever did for my victories. Over the years, I became their insurance policy, the fallback. Whenever Brian failed, I was expected to patch the hole. When he overspent, I covered the bill. When he crashed a car, I signed the loan. When he stumbled with the law, I paid the lawyer. And every time I said yes, they said nothing. And every time I said no, on the rare occasions I tried to draw a line, I was called heartless, selfish, ungrateful. The message was clear. My worth was not in being loved. My worth was in being useful. And usefulness in my family was a currency that never stopped being collected. I carried that knowledge into adulthood like a weight in my chest. I learned to keep my voice steady when they demanded to smile, when they scolded, to let the fury burn quietly where no one could see. I told myself independence was enough, that if I could just keep building, saving, proving myself someday, they would see me. But the truth settled in slowly, like cracks spreading across a wall. They never intended to see me. They only intended to use me. I was 18 the first time the lesson carved itself into me so deep I could not ignore it. I had spent 2 years working at a diner after school, pouring coffee for truckers and balancing trays of burgers and fries, tucking away every tip into an envelope I hid under my mattress. It was supposed to be for my first semester of college, my escape fund. One morning I woke up and the envelope was gone. At breakfast, my mother Linda told me not to be dramatic. "Your brother needed it," she said. Brian had gotten into trouble with a credit card, and Edward refused to let his son face collectors. They used my savings as if it were family property, not mine. I remember staring at the kitchen wall until the wallpaper swam, realizing no one was going to give it back. At 22, I had finally scraped enough to build a small credit line in my own name. My score was clean, my bills were paid. Brian called me in tears, saying he needed a co-signer for a car loan. He swore this time would be different, that he had a new job and just needed reliable transportation. Against my better judgment, I signed. He stopped showing up to work after 3 weeks. The repossession notice arrived in my mailbox with my name at the top, not his. When I confronted him, he shrugged, laughed, said he would bounce back. But my credit was scarred for years. At 25, my phone rang late one night. It was my mother, crying, her voice sticky with desperation. The mortgage was overdue. Edward had been laid off. Brian had moved back home, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. Without thinking, I wired $2,000 the next morning. They never said thank you. At Christmas, Linda handed me a mug that read "World's Best Daughter," and I nearly laughed out loud at the cruelty of it, as if a cheap mug could erase what they had taken. A year later, Brian was arrested for a DUI, the first one we knew about. Edward begged me to keep it quiet, said it would ruin the family name. I paid the lawyer's retainer, the case went away, and Brian never said a word to me. The second time he was pulled over, I refused to help. Linda called me cold, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You never understood what it means to worry about someone you love," she hissed. She said Brian's life was harder than mine, that as a woman, I had it easier because people did not expect as much from me. That was the moment I knew with absolute clarity. They did not see me as a daughter. They saw me as a resource, a faucet they could turn on whenever something broke. My usefulness was their comfort. My silence was their cover. And when I dared to resist, I was branded the villain. That night at the family dinner table, the weight of those years pressed against my ribs like a stone. The casserole steamed in the center, the salad was soggy, the iced tea too sweet, but the food barely mattered. My mother Linda's smile was stretched too wide, her lipstick bleeding into the fine lines around her mouth. She leaned toward me, hands folded, the picture of false gentleness. "Melissa," she said softly, "we have been talking. Brian has been through a lot. He needs stability. Your apartment is the perfect solution." My father. Edward barely glanced at me, just sipped his drink, his silence a gavel dropping. His eyes carried the same message they always had, that his word was law and my compliance expected. My brother Brian scrolled on his phone for a moment, then tossed it aside and leaned back, his smirk spreading across his face like oil on water. "You should be proud, sis. At least your apartment will finally be useful to the family." My throat went tight, heat rose up my chest, but I forced my face into stillness. I saw how rehearsed it was. Linda complimented the weather as though she had practiced the line Edward's silence timed to let her voice sound decisive. Brian avoiding my eyes until the moment of the reveal. They had conspired, convinced themselves that this was reasonable, that I would cave like always. Linda's voice slid into guilt-laced persuasion. "We only want what is best for him, Melissa. You are strong, independent. You will manage." "He cannot." She tilted her head like it was a compliment, like labeling me capable, excused, stealing from me. Edward finally spoke, his voice low, even. You are unmarried, no children. You do not need space the way Brian does. A man must have a foundation to build his life. The words sank into my skin like acid. There it was again, the ancient refrain, the reminder that in their eyes my gender was a disqualification, a reason to strip me of what I earned. My stomach twisted, fury pulsed, but I let it simmer beneath the surface. I smiled faintly, my fork resting neatly on the plate. Of course, I said lightly. If it helps Brian get back on his feet, I do not see why not. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Linda blinked, caught off guard. Edward exhaled, relieved. Brian leaned back, smugness creeping across his face like moss. None of them noticed how still I went after that, how my eyes fixed on a point beyond them. None of them realized I had already stepped away from their control, that the Melissa who once said yes out of fear no longer existed. They thought I had surrendered. They thought the faint smile and quiet voice were my surrender note. What they never considered, not for 1 second, was that I had already walked away from the very battlefield they were fighting over. Weeks before that dinner, I had sat alone in my apartment staring at the walls that once felt like safety but had begun to close in like a cage. Every time the phone rang, I braced for another demand, another crisis that would turn my home into a revolving door for someone else's chaos. I realized it no longer belonged to me, not really. To my parents, it was ours. To Brian, it was his future entitlement. To me, it had become a symbol of how little they respected what I built. So I called a realtor. The papers slid across the desk's signatures, scrawled, the ink drying faster than my hesitation. Within days, the place was listed, and within weeks, it was sold. Michael Reed, a quiet man with tired eyes and steady hands, took ownership. He thanked me politely, paid in full, and began moving his life into the space I had once called my sanctuary. I did not tell a soul, not my colleagues, not my neighbors, certainly not my family. I packed my life into boxes, rented a modest apartment across town, and slipped into a smaller space with peeling paint but blessed anonymity. It was not about cruelty. It was not revenge. It was preservation. For the first time in years, I breathed without waiting for the next knock on my door. My family never asked where I was, never noticed the change. They never visited, never cared enough to wonder. To them, I existed only in the form of help. So when they sat at that dinner table announcing that Brian would take over my apartment, they were not gifting him something. They were attempting to steal from a ghost. I let them speak, let them bask in their certainty, because what they did not know, what they could not even fathom, was that the keys they thought were mine no longer existed. By the time Saturday arrived with their trucks and their boxes and their endless entitlement, they would be standing on a doorstep that no longer had my name. And when the lock turned, when the door swung open, it would not be me on the other side. It would be Michael, a stranger to them, the new owner, the uninvited witness to their arrogance. That thought alone was enough to keep my smile steady as their plans unfolded. The days after that dinner turned into a parade of messages, each one heavier than the last, each one assuming my compliance as if I had no voice at all. Monday morning, my phone buzzed before I had even finished my first sip of coffee. It was Linda, her tone syrupy through text. "We will bring Brian's mattress Saturday morning. I'll help him set up the bedroom." A little heart emoji at the end, as if decoration could soften the theft. I set the phone face down and let the silence hold. That afternoon, Edward sent his version blunt, clipped. "Leave the keys ready. We'll load boxes Friday night. No, please, no question mark, only command." The weight of his authority pressed through the screen like it always had, like he believed I was still the obedient daughter who would never dare say no. Tuesday brought Brian's voice into the chorus, smug and entitled. "Hope you cleaned the place. My wife wants it perfect." As though my hours of scrubbing and vacuuming were already his right, as though my walls and counters had always belonged to him. I read the message twice, the arrogance so thick it almost made me laugh. The next morning, another text from Linda. "Let me know if you need anything cleaned before she moves in. Brian says she won't be a burden. She's bringing her own dishes." I laughed out loud in my rented kitchen, the sound sharp, surprising even to me. Brian hadn't washed a dish in his life, and now they expected me to bow in gratitude because his new bride would grace my space with her plates. By Thursday, the messages had stacked like bricks. Reminder after reminder, instructions for a move they assumed was certain. None of them called to ask if I was comfortable. None of them asked if I agreed. They did not need to. In their minds, the decision was law, my compliance guaranteed. I let the phone buzz and ring notifications piling into a tower of their entitlement. I saved every message, every demand, every wordless assumption, not because I needed proof for myself, but because I knew soon they would try to twist the story, paint me as cruel, selfish, ungrateful. I wanted their words in black and white, undeniable. By Friday evening, I sat alone with my tea, the glow of the phone lighting the room, and I felt something I had not felt in years. Calm. I knew what waited for them on Saturday. I knew the shock that would split their certainty in half. And I would not need to raise my voice. I would not need to argue. The truth was already waiting at that door in the hands of a stranger who owed them nothing. Saturday arrived bright and sharp, the kind of morning that might have been ordinary if not for the storm I knew was brewing. I woke before dawn, packed my tote with a book and my wallet, and slipped out of my rental without touching the phone that blinked with missed calls. I drove across town and parked near a farmer's market, letting the hum of vendors and the smell of fresh bread shield me from the inevitability of what was unfolding miles away. By 10 a.m., my phone buzzed so violently it rattled against the table. 3 missed calls from Linda, 2 from Edward, and 4 from Brian. I ignored them, sipping my coffee, slowly savoring the silence between vibrations. On the 5th ring, I answered. My mother's voice was brittle, jagged, stripped of all sugar. "Melissa, what is going on? There's someone here. Some man. He says he lives in the condo, says you don't live here anymore." Behind her words, I heard the shuffle of bags. Brian's raised voice, Edward muttering curses. I let the silence stretch my pulse steady, the noise of the market filling the gap. "You didn't tell us," Linda snapped. "You never said a word." "No," I replied evenly. "I didn't." The sound on the other end fractured the clatter of boxes being set down. Brian's voice cutting sharp, Dad's growl rising. Melissa Mom hissed again. "What is this?" "I sold the condo," I said simply, "weeks ago." "You what?" I moved out quietly. No one asked where I lived, so I didn't say. For a moment, the line went dead silent, the kind of pause where shock hardens into something heavier. I pictured them standing there, bags littered on the porch, staring at Michael Reed, the man who now owned the space they thought was theirs by decree. The stranger's voice drifted faintly through the phone, polite but firm. "This is my home. You need to leave." Edward's voice cut through like a blade. "You lied to us. You said Brian could move in." I never said where I answered, my tone calm, almost gentle. "I said if it helped Brian, I didn't see why not. That was at the old place, which, if you recall, I don't live in anymore." A sharp inhale from Linda, a curse from Brian, the sound of shoes scuffing concrete. For the first time in years, I held the power not by shouting, not by pleading, but by simply telling the truth they had refused to see. And in that silence, with the chaos spilling on their end, I let the calm settle into my bones like armor. By sunset that Saturday, I knew the storm would not pass quietly. Even as I sat in my small kitchen stirring sugar into tea, I felt it coming, the inevitability of their arrival. The first knock rattled the thin door like a warning. 3 sharp hits, polite enough to pretend at civility, forceful enough to remind me of the threat underneath. I stood, walked to the peephole, and there they were. Linda's hair wild, her lipstick faded, Edward's jaw tight, Brian's arms crossed with a trunk full of boxes stacked behind them on the curb. It looked like moving day, except they had not been invited, except this was not their home. I opened the door halfway, keeping the chain latched. "You found me," I said flatly. "Melissa." Linda began, her voice high and tight. "We tried calling. We did not think you would be here." Her eyes flicked past me into the apartment as though cataloging what she might rearrange. Edward's voice cut in rough rising. "You said Brian could move in. Now we are standing here with all his things, and you are acting like we are strangers." My grip on the door tightened. "I never said he could move in here. I said if it helped him, I did not see why not. That was at the old place, the one I sold. This is my home." Brian stepped forward, then his face flushed red, anger dripping from every word. This is petty Melissa. You always act like you are so much better than everyone. But this is just cruel. I tilted my head, my voice cool, steady. You packed up your life and drove across the city to move into an apartment you did not even confirm still existed. That is not cruelty. That is entitlement. Brian's mouth opened closed, his fists clenching at his sides. Edward moved between us, his presence heavy, his voice edged with warning. Enough, Melissa. We have put up with a lot from you. You owe this to your brother. The word struck like a slap. Oh, as though every dollar I had paid, every sleepless night, every sacrifice was written into a contract I had never signed. My chest burned, but my voice stayed even. I do not owe you my home. I do not owe Brian my life. Linda's face twisted desperation leaking through her anger. We are your family. We raised you. You will regret this. I looked at them all, my mother clinging to her illusion, my father wielding authority like a weapon, my brother dripping entitlement like sweat, and for the first time I felt nothing but clarity. I stepped back, closed the door to its chain, and reached for my phone. Their voices rose in the hall, pounding against the wood, but my hands did not shake. My decision was already made. The pounding on the door grew louder, their voices rising in a chorus of demands, threats, pleas. Melissa, open this door! Linda's voice cracked jagged with desperation. You cannot shut out your own family! Edward's baritone thundered behind hers. You will not embarrass us like this. You will not defy me in your own childish way. And then Brian, his voice the sharpest of all, I am not leaving Melissa. This is my apartment now. You think you can just erase me? My hands moved with a calm I had never felt before, dialing the familiar numbers, pressing the phone to my ear. The dispatcher answered on the third ring, steady, detached. 911. What is your emergency? My voice did not waver. Yes, I have family members outside my apartment who are refusing to leave. They are not on the lease. They were not invited. They are trespassing. The words tasted strange, foreign, but right. On the other side of the chain, I heard the shift, the intake of breath, the sudden pause as Linda realized what I was doing. Melissa. Her voice broke. You are calling the police on your own blood. Edward's growl deepened. Stop this nonsense. Do not you dare. Brian cursed so loudly it rattled the hallway. But I stayed steady, repeating the address, giving details, my voice clear. 10 minutes, the dispatcher said. Officers are on their way. I hung up and let the silence fall. For the first time, they looked uncertain. For the first time, the power shifted. Linda's eyes filled with wet betrayal. Edward's fists clenched impotently at his sides. Brian's face twisted between rage and fear. They had always counted on my compliance, my silence, my shame. Now I had given my boundary teeth. When the patrol car pulled up, lights washing the building in blue, the hallway froze. The officer stepped out tall and calm, her hand resting near her belt, but relaxed. Evening, she said, her tone firm, but not unkind. We received a call about trespassing. I nodded, the door open, now chain removed, my stance steady. That was me. She turned to my parents and brother, her expression unreadable. Sir, ma'am, you will need to leave the premises. This is her residence, not yours. You do not have permission to occupy it. Edward sputtered, his voice rising. This is our daughter. This is a family matter. The officer's voice did not change. And this is her home, which you are not allowed to enter without her consent. Linda's face crumpled. Brian's jaw worked furiously, but they stepped back, retreating down the hall under the weight of authority they could not bend. I watched them go, my heartbeat steady, my lungs filling with something that felt like freedom. For once, justice was not a theory. It was a door that stayed closed when I wanted it shut. The next morning, my phone lit up before the sun rose, screen flooded with missed calls and messages from numbers I did not recognize. Cousins, old neighbors, family friends who had not spoken to me in years, all of them suddenly reaching out with the same venomous question. Why would you do this to your brother? By mid-morning, I found the source. A Facebook post, public 3 paragraphs long, punctuated by heartbreak emojis, and an old photo of Brian as a toddler sitting in Edward's lap. My mother's words slashed across the screen. We raised both our children to love and support one another, but one of them has forgotten what family means. Our son Brian deserves stability, but instead, his sister Melissa abandoned him and humiliated us all. We are devastated. Hundreds of likes piled beneath it, comments dripping sympathy for Linda, anger at me. Melissa has always been selfish. How could she turn her back on blood? Some wrote I should be ashamed, others called me cold, entitled cruel. For a moment my chest tightened, the old reflex of shame threatening to coil around my ribs. But then I remembered the nights of sacrifice. The savings drained the debts in my name, the way they erased every contribution until all that remained was their narrative of my cruelty. I opened my gallery, scrolled through the evidence I had kept, each screenshot a scar carved into my life. The bank transfer of $2,000 sent at midnight to keep their mortgage afloat. The car loan co-signed in my name with Brian's default notice stamped in red across the page. The lawyer's invoice for his DEI. My signature at the bottom, the payment clearing from my account. The receipt showing the sale of the condo final and binding signed weeks before that dinner. And the text message Brian once sent me at 2 a.m., calling me a boring robot because I refused to let him crash in my apartment rent-free. I stitched them together, a thread, without commentary, without flourish. Just the truth. At the end, I added a single line. I did not abandon my family. I stopped volunteering for emotional debt. Then I posted it. The silence after was heavy, vibrating through the screen. Comments slowed, the tide shifting as strangers read the receipts. Some deleted their sympathy for Linda, others added hesitant words of support for me. But it did not matter. I had not posted for applause. I had posted for myself, for the record, for the clarity of a story told straight without manipulation. For once, their public humiliation was not mine to bear. It was theirs. That night, the apartment was still the kind of stillness that feels earned rather than accidental. No pounding at the door, no buzzing phone, no shadow of obligation waiting on the other side of the lock. I brewed chamomile tea in a chipped mug, steam curling into the dim light, and for the first time in years, I felt the calm seep into my bones without resistance. My phone lit up once Linda's name, then again Brian's. I did not open the messages. I did not need to. I knew the rhythm by now, the cycle they always spun. Shock, then anger, then guilt, then pleading. It had always worked on me before, but not tonight. Tonight, the cycle ended at silence. I pressed the block button, simple and final, the digital equivalent of closing a door that had been battered too long. I carried the tea to the balcony, stepping into the cool night air. Below, the city hummed headlights threading through the streets, someone walking a dog wrapped in a puffy coat too big for spring. 2 floors down, a neighbor I barely knew waved when she saw me. I raised my hand in return, and the gesture felt warmer, more real than decades of forced family dinners. I leaned against the railing, the mug warming my palms, and let the relief wash through me. Not triumph, not bitterness, just release. I thought of Linda's tears, Edward's rage, Brian's entitlement, and for the first time, those images did not twist my stomach. They slid off me like water no longer mine to hold, not out of cruelty, out of preservation. Some doors deserve to stay closed. Inside, I turned off the lights one by one, the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. No family photos on the walls, no echoes of arguments, just clean, quiet space. My chest loosened, my breath even, and I realized I no longer needed their approval, their twisted definition of love. I had written my own ending, and it was enough. In my family, love had always been measured in usefulness. The more I sacrificed, the more they demanded. The more I bled, the less they noticed. For years, I mistook obligation for affection, believing if I just worked harder, gave more, endured longer, then maybe one day they would see me as more than a wallet with a heartbeat. But families built on entitlement do not transform with kindness. They transform only when the door finally closes, when the faucet runs dry, when the daughter they dismissed as cold decides she would rather be free than endlessly drained. I did not abandon them. I abandoned the role they forced onto me. I chose to stop being the emergency fund for lives built on excuses. I chose to preserve myself. Standing on that balcony, the night cool against my skin, I realized family is not defined by blood or obligation. It is defined by choice, by respect, by the quiet exchange of love without debt. A neighbor's wave can hold more truth than decades of manipulation. A rented apartment with no expectations can feel more like home than a condo suffocated by entitlement. I thought of Brian's face when the officer told him to leave of Linda's post, unraveling under the weight of receipts of Edward's silence, when his authority no longer mattered. For once, their judgment did not cling to me. It fell away, powerless. I do not know what they tell people now, what version of the story they spin to keep their pride intact. But I do know my truth is stronger than their narrative. And I know peace tastes far better than their approval ever could. If you are listening and you have lived under the weight of favoritism, if you have been told that your sacrifices are obligations and your boundaries cruelty, I want you to hear me clearly. Love is not debt. You do not owe anyone your life simply because they share your blood. Preservation is not selfishness. It is survival. And survival, when chosen deliberately, is freedom. So I will leave you with this. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell me your city. Tell me your time. If you have ever drawn a line with toxic families, share your story in the comments. And if you want more stories like mine, stories where betrayal meets justice and silence becomes strength, make sure you like this video and subscribe, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close a door and never open it again.